So in this field we've got a group of our cattle, and on the farm we check all of our livestock at least once a day, make sure the fences are all secure, they've got enough grass and fodder to eat, and they've got fresh water, but also that they're fit and healthy. So I'll walk in amongst a bunch of cattle like this, get them moving around and make sure they're all well. There's one lying down at the back there that you might think, okay, he's just resting, but need to get it up, make sure that it's fit and well. It might be lame, it might be lying down for a reason because it's not feeling very well. Come on, up you get. Come on then. That's a little Highland heifer. She was just getting out the sun and being in the shade. And so these cattle are a ruminant. They're like sheep and goats and deer. They've got 4 stomachs. So what they do is they graze grass and they swallow that down into their stomachs, and then they regurgitate it and ruminate and chew it again, and they can break down the cellulose of plants to produce milk and meat and grow. So they're producing that protein from grass. And if you or I tried to live off this stuff, we'd die. And so these ruminants are incredible creatures to be able to graze pastures and produce good quality food for us. And interestingly, cattle get a bit of a bad reputation because in the process of rumination, breaking down the cellulose of this grass, they have a huge amount of microbial activity working in their gut, and that produces methane that they generally burp out. And that's a greenhouse gas, so it can be damaging to the environment. So there's a lot of talk about how we should be eating less red meat and less dairy products from cattle. And in fact, in this country, we're 60% better than many other countries around the world, partly because we feed so much grass. We don't have our animals in these huge feedlots on mud where they get fed grain and soya that's grown to feed them. They don't get hormone implants. These are animals that live out in the natural environment or in these pastures that are never ploughed, never cultivated. The carbon is held in the soil. So if you remember photosynthesis at school, what happens is that the plant, to produce all the green matter, is photosynthesizing, and in doing that, it's sucking up CO2 from the atmosphere, taking it down into its roots, and then that carbon is stored in the soil, and the plant produces oxygen. And so that carbon is a carbon sink. So actually the offset from their burping to the photosynthesis that's happening in our plants is a fair balance. So if you can eat meat from cattle that are produced off grass, then actually environmentally, that's quite a good thing to be doing. So I don't mind what people eat, whether they're vegetarians or vegans, but what I do say is, if you're doing it for environmental reasons, you're conscious about that, just think very carefully about how the food on your plate was produced and where it came from and what impact that had. Now, of course, the cows are grazing on this grass all spring and summer because it's growing away, the climate is warm, we're getting plenty of rain, and they're living off this pasture. But in the winter months, of course, it gets colder and the grass stops growing. So what happens then? Well, I'll go back to the farm and I'll show you. So you've seen the cattle grazing out in the fields, but of course, when winter comes and the weather cools down, the grass stops growing. So eventually they just run out of grass. So then we need to supplementary feed them with what's called forage. There's often quite a lot of confusion over the difference between hay, silage and straw. So this is hay. And what this is grass that's grown during the spring and summer, and then it flowers and starts to run to seed, and then we mow it. And what you need is a window of opportunity of about 5 dry days, hot sunny days, because what you want this to do is to dry out. So once it's mown, you go through with a tractor with a spreader on the back and it spreads the grass out onto the ground and the sun will dry it out. You then row it up again and let it go in a row, moves it around, spread it out again so it dries. And eventually after 3 or 4 days, it's very, very dry. And then it can be put into these bales and stored in the shed. If it's wet, it'll go mouldy and rot, so it needs to be dry. So if you get rain during that time, then you have to wait for it to dry out. So you've got to be right on the button when it comes to the weather forecast. Now silage is slightly different because that is again grass that's grown during the spring and summer, but it's mown when it's a little bit younger. It's got more sugars and more moisture in it. And then what happens with that, it can be baled and wrapped in plastic to get it into anaerobic conditions so that it ferments and pickles and then will keep without rotting. Or you can put it into a silage clamp, a great big concrete clamp that then is driven on by the tractors to squash the grass down, and then a plastic sheet put on it. Or what we do is we put it into an ag bag, and I'll show you that in a minute. Now straw is completely different. It's still a plant, but what it is, it's either wheat, barley, or oat straw. And this is the growing crop in the field. The combine harvester goes through and thrashes the grain out to collect the grain that we put into our grain store. The straw falls out the back of the combine in rows, and we then bale it up. And we've got piles of straw here from our big arable farm that we sell. And you'll see over here that Ali is loading the trailer of some of the straw from last year that's going to go down to Wales to livestock farms. And this is our bale spreader. So in here we put the big bales of straw, cut the string off, that goes on front of our loader tractor, and it throws the straw out into the pens so they've got a nice dry, clean bed during the winter months. So with bales of straw and hay, there are lots of different shapes and sizes. So we've got these big square bales of barley straw that are stored inside, and then we use some ourselves and then some are sold. If you want to have a more handleable bale, there are smaller bales like these ones. So if you want to be able to transport them and throw them around by hand, there are small bales. Obviously these are all moved by a front-end loader by our JCB. And then of course you do get round bales as well that you might see. And with hay and straw, it can be stored outside, but what happens is you get quite a lot of wastage on the outside. It sort of thatches, so the rain runs off it. So because we've got these lovely big sheds, we store all our hay and straw inside in these big square bales, and you can pack them in and get a lot of it in here. It's quite efficient for the usage of the space. So in this field, we're making silage. So this is grass, but it's also mixed up with a plant called sandfoin, known as holy hay, and it's very nutritious. And with the mixture of grass and sandfoin, it produces good energy, but also plenty of sugars. And what we've done is allowed this crop to grow until it was about this tall. It's then been mown yesterday and then wilted overnight and early this morning. And so wilting means that it's just dried out a little bit. Now it's being raked up, so you're putting 4 rows into one, and then the forage harvester over there goes along and picks up that row of grass, chops it, throws it then into the trailer, and then the trailer goes back to the farm where it's put inside an ag bag. So this is the rake. It travels along, just pulling 4 rows of mown grass into one big row. Quite a clever machine with these twisting tables that turn, just picking the grass up and pulling it all into one big row. And here it is, 4 rows in one, ready for the forage harvester to come along and pick up. So this is the forage harvester. It's a beast of a machine. It's about 650 horsepower. And none of this kit belongs to us. These are contractors that travel all over the country foraging for farmers. It's a huge expense to buy this bit of equipment, so it's much more economically viable for us to employ the contractors to do the work for us. And you can see at the bottom of the yellow bit on the front, that's the pickup, and it goes along and picks up the grass from those 4 rows that have been put into one. The auger then pulls the grass into the guts of the machine, where there's spinning discs with very, very sharp knives, and it chops it into about 15mm length, so it makes it more digestible for the animals in the winter. Here comes the trailer, and as he travels along, the grass is chopped and then blown into the trailer that's then taken back to the farm. And it can do about 20 acres an hour. So what's that? 8 hectares an hour, really covering the ground. Incredible bit of kit. So the trailers come up from the field, they go over the weighbridge so we know what tonnage of grass we've got, and then they back up to the ag bag machine and they tip the grass into this hopper. And you can see here that it's been chopped by the forager down to these lengths that make it more digestible for the cattle and sheep. And then as the trailer tips, there's a bed here that moves and it takes the grass up into these spines that then pull it and force it into the ag bag. And the ag bag is 12 foot in diameter and it's forcing that grass in nice and tight so that it's in anaerobic conditions, which means there's no oxygen. And that then pickles the grass and preserves it so that it can stay in there for a couple of years. And what we will be doing is feeding it to the cattle this winter. And this machine, like the Forage Harvester, is about 600 horsepower. And this company have got 12 of these machines working all over the country. We're putting grass in it to feed to the cattle, but also they use it for anaerobic digesters. So crops are put into an ag bag and stored and then fed into anaerobic digesters where the grass is pickled to produce gas that then goes into a turbine to produce electricity. So that's another use of some of the crops that we're growing on farms. We don't do that here, but that's what's happening in other places. If I take you around the side, you can see the bag. So here's the ag bag. It's one great big completely sealed sausage of grass under thick plastic, and that keeps it in these anaerobic conditions. And of course we're trying to move away from plastic, and in an ag bag like this you use less than you would if you were wrapping a bale, and all this is recycled once the ag bag has been used up and fed to the cattle. So there we have it. I hope you found that interesting. That's how we produce our fodder to feed the animals during the winter. And hopefully you now know the difference between hay, silage and straw. So if you've enjoyed this episode, then subscribe to the channel for more.